accustomed to taking warmth for granted. One turn of the valve on the radiator or one press of a button on the air conditioner remote control, and our home is filled with comfort. We have forgotten that for most of human history, things were completely different. Winter in the Middle Ages was not just a season, but a real test of endurance. When the sun went down, the world was plunged into icy darkness, and the struggle for survival began anew every night. It was an era when warmth was the most valuable commodity, and its absence meant a slow death. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary moss could save an entire family from freezing to death, and why smoke inside a peasant's house was not a curse, but a blessing. What if I told you that everything you believed about medieval castles is untrue? We imagine them as huge, echoing, icy stone boxes where lords and ladies chatter their teeth from the cold. But that's only part of the truth, hiding the remarkable ingenuity of medieval man. No one in their right mind would try to heat the entire castle. That would be as pointless as trying to boil a lake. Instead, they created islands of warmth, small, cozy rooms designed specifically for winter living. The secret lay in multi-layered protection from the cold. The stone walls we see today were only the foundation. From the inside, they were completely covered with heavy tapestries and woolen fabrics, which acted as modern insulation. These tapestries were not just decoration, but a vital technology. They cut off the icy breath of the stone and prevented drafts from blowing through the rooms. The thick fabric created an air layer that effectively retained precious heat inside. The floor was covered with thick layers of straw or reeds, and on top of them, expensive carpets. This not only added comfort, but also insulated from the cold coming from the stone slabs of the lower floor or basement. Each layer was part of a unified heat preservation system.
My father's axe, he ran like a scared rabbit.
Beds were transformed into veritable fortresses against the cold. Huge canopies with thick curtains created an enclosed space similar to a tent. The heat from the bodies of the sleeping people warmed this small volume of air, allowing them to sleep in relative comfort. The warmest place in the castle was the Lord's private quarters, known as the solar. This room was usually located on the top floor, above the Great Hall, so that the heat from the main hearth would rise upwards. It was here that the family spent most of their winter evenings.
I swear the look on his face when the
These rooms always had their own, more compact fireplace. Unlike the huge hearths in the halls, it was not intended for cooking, but exclusively for heating. Its design was more efficient and provided more directed heat. Thus, life in the castle in winter was not a struggle against the cold throughout the building, but the art of creating and retaining heat in limited, well-insulated spaces. It was a strategy of concentrating resources rather than dispersing them.
Quite perfect.
I'm very interested to hear your point of view. How well do you think modern people, accustomed to central heating, would be able to adapt to such a system of islands of heat? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the shocking truth about what was the main invisible enemy of medieval man in the harsh winter? It was not so much the static cold of low temperatures as its constant, insidious companion, the pervasive, destructive dampness and humidity. It was this dampness that methodically turned the dwelling of a simple peasant into a cold, damp, and uncomfortable trap for health, where moisture destroyed both the body and the house at the same time, slowly but surely. Dry cold is tolerable, but damp cold kills. The peasants knew this truth firsthand, suffering from rheumatism, coughs, and the decay of everything around them from the excess water in the air, walls, and floors. The houses of simple peasants were built from the meager materials that were available in the village. wood from the forest, clay from the ground, and straw from the fields after the harvest. The foundation was a simple wooden frame of posts and beams, and the walls were woven from flexible willow rods between the posts, creating a so-called wicker latticework foundation like a basket. This wattle was then thickly coated on both sides with a thick layer of a viscous mixture of clay, chopped straw for strength, and cow manure as a binder. A primitive but effective concrete made from organic materials. The manure added plasticity and strength as it dried, although the smell was distinctive until the walls were completely dry in the sun. This ancient construction technology, known in Russia as masanka or turlishnaya kata, was extremely cheap and quick to implement. A house could be built in a week by a family, but it had serious critical shortcomings in terms of durability. The clay plaster provided good protection from the piercing wind, creating a barrier, but it was very poor and short-lived against the penetrating moisture of rain and snow. In rainy weather or during the spring thaw, the porous walls greedily absorbed water like a sponge, becoming cold, damp through and through, and heavy. Wet clay lost its insulating properties, turning into a conductor of cold instead of a barrier. Heat loss through damp walls was many times higher than through dry ones, making heating the house a useless waste of firewood.
Now the mud begins.
The roofs of poor houses were covered with a thick layer of straw or reeds from the marshes, half a meter thick. At first, such organic roofing provided good protection from rain and snow, diverting water, but over time it inevitably began to rot from moisture and become covered with mold, losing its tightness and leaking. Dirty water constantly dripping from the ceiling onto the heads of the inhabitants was a sad part of winter life in old houses. Buckets and basins for collecting drips were placed throughout the house, reminding them of the need to repair the roof in the spring, which had been postponed for years due to poverty and lack of materials. The floors in peasant houses were universally earthen, without any covering, simply compacted earth. They were simply tamped down with feet and tools, and for relative cleanliness from dirt and the illusion of warmth, a thick layer of straw or hay was spread over the entire area. This straw quickly absorbed moisture from the breath of people and animals, dirt from their feet, waste, and excrement, turning into compost, and had to be completely replaced once a month or more often to prevent the house from turning into a foul-smelling swamp with puddles. The floor was the weakest link. It gave off dampness, cold, and odors that poisoned the air, but there was no alternative for the poor, who could not afford wooden flooring or stone slabs. The heart and center of the house was an open hearth, located right in the geometric center of the only room for even heating. It had no chimney or pipe in the modern sense, only an open fire on the ground or stone platform. The smoke from the burning wood filled the entire room with a thick cloud and slowly, over hours, escaped through a small opening in the roof above the hearth or simply through numerous cracks in the walls and thatched roof, creating a natural but slow draft. A chimney was a luxury for the rich, inaccessible to peasants, who lived in the smoke as if in fog, getting used to it from birth to death. Therefore, inside a typical peasant hut, there was always thick, acrid smog and smoke at head level. The wooden walls and thatched ceiling were covered with a thick, sticky layer of black, oily soot, and soot several millimeters thick. The smoke constantly irritated their eyes and made it difficult to breathe, causing chronic coughing, but they had to humbly put up with it all their lives because it was an inevitable side effect of the only available source of heat and light, fire. There was no choice, either smoke and warmth or clean air and death from cold. There was no third option, so they chose to live in smoke, paying for their survival in winter with the health of their lungs. The constant struggle with the ever-present dampness was a daily routine. Clothes and bedding, blankets, pillows, were regularly dried by the hearth, hung on poles. but it was physically impossible to completely get rid of the oppressive feeling of damp, sticky humidity in the air without heating and ventilation. This pervasive dampness literally penetrated the bones of the joints and exacerbated the subjective feeling of cold many times over. Damp cold feels 10 degrees colder than dry cold at the same temperature, making life a torment where it is impossible to warm up even by the fire because the moisture and clothing in the air drew heat away faster than the fire could provide it. Small window openings, if they were provided in the walls at all, were tightly plugged for the winter with bundles of straw, old rags, or, for the wealthy, covered with expensive oiled parchment. This helped to keep a little heat inside, preventing it from escaping, but at the same time turned the house into a space as dark as a cave and as stuffy as a coffin without fresh air. Precious daylight hardly penetrated through the cracks, and even during the day it was necessary to live in semi-darkness, lit only by the fire in the hearth. Saving heat required sacrificing light and air, and the peasants chose warmth, agreeing to live in darkness and stuffiness for months without sunlight. But what if I told you something paradoxical? That this acrid, suffocating smoke was not only a serious health problem, but also an unexpected solution to other problems. In the next chapter, you will learn how smoke became part of a unique, primitive heating system, and at the same time preserved and protected the house itself and its contents from destruction, in which people had lived for generations. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of medieval folk builders, which you are unlikely to have read about in modern history or architecture textbooks. We naively tend to consider the smoky hut, or a hut heated by a black stove without a chimney, to be a primitive, unsanitary, and unhealthy dwelling of savages.
The castle itself was
However, this heating system was not the result of ignorance, but rather the result of centuries of folk wisdom and observation, and had its own unique hidden advantages for the durability of the dwelling. What seems like a disadvantage to modern people was a well-thought-out solution for medieval peasants, who were focused on survival rather than comfort. Function was more important than form, and results were more important than process. The main engineering secret of the smoky hut was that the thick smoke from the hearth did not simply escape uselessly, getting lost outside. Slowly rising to the ceiling according to the laws of convection, hot air and tiny particles of soot with tar gradually gave off their precious heat to the wooden structures of the roof and the upper crowns of the log house, warming them up. The house itself became a huge inert heat accumulator. The massive logs accumulated heat for hours and slowly released it at night after the fire died down. It was a thermal mass that worked like a battery, charging during the day, discharging at night, smoothing out temperature fluctuations and saving firewood. Because the heat was not lost instantly, but was retained in the wood of the walls and ceiling. Wood smoked over many years acquired amazing chemical properties that are unexpected for modern man. Tar, resins, and soot, penetrating deep into the porous structure of the wood under the influence of heat, literally made it practically eternal and indestructible. They were a powerful natural antiseptic and preservative that effectively protected organic wood from decay caused by moisture, mold, fungi, and wood-boring insects such as woodworms and termites. Smoked wood became almost like stone, hard, dark, and invulnerable to biological decay, which destroyed ordinary wood over decades, turning it into dust and ashes. Thus, smoke not only heated the room for several hours, but also simultaneously preserved and mummified the dwelling itself for centuries of service. The service life of a smoky smoked isba was significantly longer, 100, 150 years compared to 30, 50 years, than more civilized houses with primitive chimneys, where the roof structures remained clean of soot, but completely defenseless against destructive moisture and insects. It was a strategic long-term investment in the survival of the family for generations to come. The house was built not for decades, but for centuries, outliving its builders and serving their grandchildren and great-grandchildren without major repairs, which was critical for poor peasants who did not have the resources for frequent construction. Moreover, the acrid smoke effectively disinfected the interior of the room around the clock. It chemically killed disease-causing microbes and bacteria in the air and on surfaces, walls, floors, furniture, with phenols and formaldehyde in the smoke. In conditions of overcrowding of people and animals in one room and a complete lack of hygiene, this was a crucial invisible factor in curbing the spread of infectious diseases and epidemics during the winter period of isolation. Smoke was a natural disinfectant that worked continuously as long as the fire burned. Free sanitation without chemicals or effort, a side effect of heating that became a major long-term health benefit for the family. The thick soot that gradually settled on the walls in a layer several millimeters thick also played a practical role in thermal insulation. The thick, greasy layer of soot created additional porous insulation, physically sealing small cracks in the walls and ceiling and significantly reducing heat loss through them. The house became more airtight over the years rather than falling apart and retained heat better inside. Soot was a natural sealant and insulator, applied free of charge by the heating process itself without any additional effort, improving the thermal insulation of the house with each year of operation, which is paradoxical but true. Over the centuries, people adapted to constant life in smoke on a physiological and behavioral level. They knew empirically from experience that, according to the laws of physics, the cleanest air from smoke is at the bottom, near the cold floor, where it is denser and heavier. Therefore, all benches for sitting and sleeping were deliberately made as low as possible, almost on the floor, in an effort to spend as much time as possible below the level of the dense cloud of smoke that constantly hung under the ceiling. Life took place in the lower tier of the room, where it was possible to breathe relatively clean air. Vertical stratification of air was used for survival. The top was given to smoke. The bottom was left for themselves, coexisting in the same space without conflict. An open hearth without a chimney or pipe was also much more efficient from a practical point of view in terms of heat transfer to the room. Absolutely all the heat generated by the combustion of wood, 100% of the energy, remained inside the room, heating the air, walls, and people. Primitive early chimneys made of wood or clay, on the contrary, with their strong draft, wasted up to 80% of the hot air and heat, sending it up the pipe into the street. The paradox is that the civilized chimney was wasteful of heat, while the primitive hearth without a pipe was efficient, retaining every calorie inside for heating rather than releasing it uselessly into the atmosphere. This smoky heating system was perfectly engineered for the harsh conditions of long winters and scarce resources. It required significantly less scarce fuel, firewood, to heat the same volume of space to the same temperature, which was critical for survival when every log had to be fought for with nature, chopped and dragged through the snow. Saving fuel directly meant saving physical strength and precious family time, which could be spent on other survival tasks, preparing food, repairs, and caring for livestock. Heating efficiency was not a matter of comfort, but of survival. The less wood you needed, the better your chances of surviving the winter if your supplies ran out in February or March, when there were still months to go before spring and the wood was running out. Of course, this does not negate the scientific fact that constantly breathing such polluted smoke was objectively harmful to the health of the lungs and eyes. Chronic bronchitis, emphysema, cancer. But in the medieval system of values and priorities, the choice was not between abstract comfort and discomfort, but between the concrete survival of the family and the death of everyone from cold or the destruction of the house. And a smoky, smoke-filled hut was the most effective tool available for the first option. Survival at any cost, even at the cost of lung health, which was an acceptable compromise because dying of lung disease at 50 was better than freezing to death at 30 or living in a house that had rotted away in 20 years.
sickness was a fair price.
It was a
for
brilliant,
survival.
hard-won compromise, found by generations through painful trial and error and fatal mistakes. Intuitively, without science, people used all the useful properties of fire in a comprehensive way, including those secondary ones that we today arrogantly consider harmful byproducts:
They learned
smoke,
failure
soot,
margin
and tar.
away.
Smoke was not an enemy of health to be avoided, but a harsh, acrid, yet absolutely necessary ally in the annual struggle for survival against winter. Without it, houses would rot, families would freeze, diseases would spread, so it was tolerated, accepted, and even valued as the lesser evil of all possible heating options available to poor peasants without the technology and resources of civilization. Guess how many layers of clothing a medieval peasant had to wear just to stay warm? The answer may surprise you. Not that many. The secret was not in quantity, but in quality and the right combination of materials, the main one being wool. Sheep's wool was a strategic resource in the Middle Ages, no less important than grain or iron. Its unique properties made it an ideal material for cold weather. Unlike cotton or linen, wool continues to provide warmth even when wet. This was critically important in conditions of constant dampness. Woolen clothing absorbed moisture but did not stick to the body, maintaining an air layer. This layer, heated by body heat, was the main insulator. The basis of the wardrobe was a long linen shirt, which was worn on the naked body. Linen absorbed sweat well and was more hygienic than wool. One or two tunics made of coarse woolen fabric were worn over this shirt. Trousers, or so-called brays, were also made of linen, and long woolen stockings were worn over them. This design allowed for freedom of movement and work. All items of clothing were loose-fitting so as not to restrict movement and to create additional air pockets. The outer garment was a heavy woolen cloak or hooded cape called a klobuk. This cloak was a versatile item. It protected against rain, wind, and snow. At night, it often served as a blanket. Footwear was simple: leather shoes or boots. To keep them warm, they were stuffed with dry straw, moss, or fabric scraps. This created an additional insulating layer and absorbed moisture. It was essential to cover the head. Men wore woolen or felt hats, and women wore scarves. A huge amount of heat escapes through an uncovered head, and medieval people knew this very well. The main principle was layering. Several thin layers of clothing keep you much warmer than one thick layer. Air is trapped between the layers, which is the best heat insulator. Rich people, of course, had access to the best materials. They could afford fur-lined clothing, but the basic principle remained the same: a linen shirt, a woolen tunic, and a warm cloak. How effective do you think such clothing was compared to modern synthetic materials? In the next chapter, we will talk about what people used to heat their hearths and fireplaces and how much this fuel cost. Heat in a medieval home did not come from a romantic fire in the hearth, but from long and physically demanding work to prepare fuel long before winter. For centuries and millennia, wood was the main and only mass source of energy. The forest literally gave life. Heat, material for construction, tools, utensils, and control over forest resources was the unshakable foundation of the entire feudal economy and power. Whoever owned the forest owned the lives of the peasants. Without the forest, there were no homes, no heat, no survival. So the forest was a treasure that the feudal lords guarded more closely than gold. For gold does not keep you warm in winter, but firewood does, and it feeds you and builds you a roof over your head. Ordinary serfs were strictly forbidden, under penalty of punishment, to cut down living trees in the lord's forest without permission. This was considered a serious criminal offense. Theft of feudal property, for which one could pay dearly not only with a ruinous fine, but also with personal freedom, imprisonment, branding, and even hanging in special cases. The forest belonged to the feudal lord under feudal law, and he zealously guarded his wealth with foresters and laws, not allowing peasants to even come close to an axe without supervision. Wood was capital that could not be entrusted to those who used it. The conflict of interest was irresolvable, and the authorities resolved it by force of law in their favor, condemning the peasants to a perpetual fuel shortage. However, peasants traditionally had a limited right to collect dead wood, dry dead branches and fallen trees on the ground without cutting down living trees. This ancient right, called estovers in English, was a vital privilege for survival, which the feudal lords could not take away completely without a revolt. Throughout late autumn, before the snow fell, peasant families spent whole days in the cold forest, carefully gathering absolutely everything that could theoretically burn, from thick branches to thin twigs and bark. Collecting dead wood was not a walk in the park, but hard labor. Walking kilometers through the forest, bending over thousands of times, carrying heavy loads on your back until you were exhausted, competing with your neighbors for every branch in the common forest, where everyone was looking for the same thing in limited quantities. This scarce fuel from fallen trees was often catastrophically insufficient for the entire long winter of 4 or 5 months. Therefore, it was necessary to desperately seek alternatives to firewood at any cost. In marshy, treeless areas such as Ireland, Scotland, or the Netherlands, the main and only fuel was peat, moss from bogs compressed over centuries. It was cut into large, heavy briquettes with special shovels from the bog and dried throughout the short summer in the sun and wind, turning it into a solid fuel. Peat bogs were a strategic resource, fought over by clans and villages. Without peat, there was no chance of surviving the winter in treeless areas, so control of the bogs was a matter of life and death for communities. Peat burned slowly, smoldering for hours, and provided a lot of steady heat for heating, but it also produced a lot of acrid smoke and had a specific musty smell of the bog that permeated everything. However, in treeless areas, desperate people simply had no other choice or alternative: peat or death from cold. Peat bogs were as valuable to the economy as arable land for food. They were divided, inherited, sold, and guarded as a source of wealth that provided warmth. Peat was the currency of the North, the black gold of the poor, which could be dug out of the ground with one's own hands without the feudal lord's permission, making it the fuel of freedom, unlike firewood from the lord's forest. In some richer regions with forests, charcoal, carbonized wood, was used. It was obtained by slowly burning wood in special pits or piles without access to oxygen, pyrolysis. Coal provided significantly more concentrated heat per unit of weight and burned with almost no smoke or soot, making it an ideal high-temperature fuel for blacksmiths' forges and fireplaces in the rich castles of the nobility, where soot was aesthetically unacceptable. Charcoal was the technological fuel of civilization. Without it, there would have been no metallurgy, weapons, or tools, but its production required huge amounts of wood and skilled charcoal burners, which made it an elite commodity. But for poor peasants, charcoal was prohibitively expensive, 3 to 5 times more expensive than firewood. They used it only in extremely rare cases of urgent need, for forging tools once a year. Their main everyday fuel remained firewood from fallen trees and anything that could replace or supplement it in the mixture. Any organic matter that could burn and give off at least a little heat was used indiscriminately. Absolutely everything that burned was used. They carefully collected pine cones with resin, dry, hard heather from wastelands, reeds from riverbanks, and even dung, sun-dried manure from domestic cows and horses mixed with straw. In the steppes and treeless, arid regions of Asia and the East, dung was practically the only widely available fuel for many centuries and millennia. Civilizations were built on burning shit, which sounds humiliating, but was the reality for billions of people who did not have access to forests. Dung burned hot, but it smelled bad, reminding everyone of its origin with every breath. But there was no choice, either the stench or the cold, and people chose to live with the stench, getting used to the smell from childhood until they completely ignored it. Preparing enough fuel for the winter was exhausting, hard physical labor that took up a huge chunk of a peasant family's time and energy in the fall. Firewood had to be not only found and gathered in the forest, but also carried to the village on the back for kilometers, then chopped with an axe into logs and carefully stacked in a protected woodpile for mandatory drying in the wind. The size and density of the woodpile in late autumn directly determined whether the family would survive the winter or freeze to death in February when the supplies ran out. The woodpile was a measure of the chances of survival. The higher it was, the more peacefully one could sleep in winter, knowing that warmth was guaranteed until spring. A low woodpile in October meant a hungry, cold winter and the risk of death before March. Fuel was a real hard currency and wealth, more valuable than money. It was fanatically saved, cherished, and stretched as much as possible without wasting anything. The hearth was lit only twice a day to cook the necessary food, and the rest of the time they tried to carefully maintain the smoldering coals under the ashes, so as not to waste precious tinder or kindling on the laborious task of relighting the fire with a flint. A dead fire was a disaster. They had to go to their neighbors for coals, losing time and honor, or spend an hour lighting it with friction or flint, which was torture. Fire was a living thing that had to be fed and protected from death. It was guarded around the clock, standing watch by the hearth, not allowing it to go out, because rekindling it was more expensive than keeping it smoldering. What if I showed you a medieval time machine for preserving food? It is not some complicated mechanism, but a simple dark subfloor or cellar. It was this that allowed the harvest to be preserved and provided people with food during the long and hungry winter when the land produced nothing. The winter diet of a medieval person was very different from the summer diet. Fresh vegetables and fruits disappeared and were replaced by foods that could be stored for months. The main task was not only to satisfy hunger, but also to get enough calories to fight the cold. The basis of the diet was grain: wheat, rye, barley, and oats. Flour was used to bake coarse but filling bread, which was on the table every day. They also cooked thick porridges and soups, which provided a long-lasting feeling of fullness and warmth. Meat was a rarity for peasants, but in winter there was a little more of it. In the fall, most of the livestock was slaughtered, as it was impossible to feed it in winter. Meat was salted, dried, and smoked so that it could be stored until spring. Pork was especially valuable because of its high-fat content. Salted lard was a strategic product, a real calorie bomb. A small piece of lard with bread could keep a peasant going for a whole day of hard work in the cold. Fish was also preserved for future use. It was salted and dried until it became as hard as a board. This stockfish, or dried cod, could be stored for years and was an important part of the diet, especially during the numerous fasts when meat was forbidden. Vegetables were stored in cellars and basements. Cabbage was fermented to provide a source of vitamins in the middle of winter. Turnips, carrots, parsnips, and beets could be stored in a cool cellar until spring without losing their nutritional properties. Winter food was fatty, salty, and high in calories. This was dictated not by taste preferences, but by harsh necessity. In order for the body to produce enough heat, it needed high-calorie fuel, and fats were its best source. Vitamin deficiency was a serious problem. By the end of winter, many suffered from scurvy and other vitamin deficiencies. Sauerkraut, onions, and some herbs were the only available sources of vitamin C. Do you think you could survive on a diet of salted meat, turnips, and coarse bread? In the next chapter, we will learn how the daily routine changed with the arrival of winter and why darkness was as much an enemy as the cold. With the arrival of winter, the rhythm of life in medieval society changed dramatically. Short daylight hours and cold weather dictated their own rules. Life seemed to slow down, falling into a kind of seasonal hibernation, but work never stopped completely. Daylight hours were reduced to 8 hours or less. This meant that time for outdoor work was extremely limited. People got up at dawn to get everything done before early dusk. The main task was to maintain life. It was necessary to care for the livestock left for the winter. The animals were kept in a barn, which was often attached directly to the house so that their body heat would help warm the dwelling. The men repaired tools, wove baskets, worked with wood, and did other crafts that could be done indoors. Winter was a time to prepare for the new agricultural season. The future harvest depended on the quality of this preparation. Women spent long winter evenings spinning wool and weaving. Each family had to provide its own clothing. Monotonous work by the hearth continued for hours by the light of smoldering coals. Conserving energy was the main principle. People tried to move as little as possible without necessity. Sudden movements in the cold led to rapid heat loss, and it was difficult to replenish it. Long, dark evenings were spent together in one room by the hearth. It was a time for telling stories, legends, and fairy tales. Oral tradition was the main way of transmitting information and entertainment. When darkness fell, the world outside the home became hostile. Travel in winter was rare and dangerous. Roads were covered with snow, and in the forests, it was easy to get lost or encounter hungry predators. They saved not only fuel, but also light. Torches and candles were expensive. Therefore, they tried to finish most of their work before dark and went to bed when night fell. Winter was a time of isolation. Villages were cut off from each other by snowdrifts. The community closed in on itself, relying only on its own strength and the supplies made in summer and autumn. In the fight against the winter cold, the most important resource was not fuel or food, but other people. It was almost impossible to survive alone. Only the unity of the family and the community gave people a chance to live until spring. The family was the basic unit of survival. Often, several generations lived under one roof. Parents, children, grandparents. A large number of people in one house meant more warmth from their bodies. At night, everyone slept together on wide benches or simply on the floor by the hearth. People huddled close together to keep warm. This was the norm dictated by harsh necessity. Working together also helped to keep warm and bring people closer together. Men repaired roofs or cleared snow from roads together. Women gathered to spin or sew, turning monotonous work into an opportunity for socializing. Holidays played a huge role in maintaining morale. The 12 days of Christmas were a time of rest and feasting. It was a brief respite in the middle of a dark and cold winter, an opportunity to eat their fill and be together.
Here is a fine piece for you.
The church was one of the few public buildings with heating. On cold days, people went to church not only for religious reasons, but also to warm themselves in the large stone building, where hundreds of candles burned.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
Taverns and inns were also centers of social life. Here you could not only drink ale, but also warm yourself by the large hearth and hear news from other villages from rare travelers. The warmth of the hearth was shared and accessible to all. Helping neighbors was not just an act of goodwill, but an unwritten law. If someone ran out of firewood or food, the community tried to help. Everyone understood that today you help, and tomorrow you may need help yourself. The sick and elderly who could not take care of themselves were taken care of by neighbors or relatives. It was unthinkable to leave a person alone to freeze in a cold house. The sense of community was stronger than individualism.
Keep you warm through the storm.
Strike the spirit.
Winter revealed the true essence of human relationships. It forced people to be closer to each other, both literally and figuratively. The cold was a common threat that made people stronger by forcing them to work together. The long winter nights in the Middle Ages were not just dark, they were almost completely black. The absence of artificial lighting, to which we are so accustomed, changed the very perception of the world. Darkness was not just the absence of light, but a tangible, oppressive force. The main and often only source of light in a peasant's home was the fire in the hearth. It gave off an uneven, flickering light that illuminated people's faces and objects, but left the corners of the room in deep shadow. This semi-darkness shaped a special, mystical worldview. For additional lighting, they used splinters, thin, long pieces of dry wood. They were inserted into special holders called light holders. The splinters burned quickly and smoked heavily, so they had to be changed constantly. Wealthier people, such as craftsmen or wealthy townspeople, could afford tallow candles. They were made from animal fat, beef or mutton. Such candles burned longer than splinters, but emitted an unpleasant odor and smoked heavily. Wax candles were a real luxury. They were made from beeswax, burned brightly and cleanly, and had a pleasant aroma. But they were fabulously expensive, and only the aristocracy and the church could afford them. All of life was subject to the natural cycle of light and darkness. When the sun went down, any work that required good eyesight stopped. It was time to rest, tell stories, or sleep. Night was a time of fear. In the darkness, hearing became more acute, and every rustle and creak seemed ominous. It was a time when, according to popular belief, evil spirits, witches, and other evil creatures awoke. People tried not to leave their homes after dark unless absolutely necessary. Towns and villages were plunged into pitch darkness. There was no street lighting whatsoever. It was only possible to move around in such darkness with a torch or a handheld lantern. The lantern was a candle enclosed in a casing with thin horn plates that protected the flame from the wind. But even with a lantern, it was easy to lose your way. This eternal struggle with darkness left a deep mark on the culture and psychology of people. Light became associated with goodness, safety, and life, while darkness became associated with evil, danger, and death. This symbolism permeates all medieval art and literature. Despite all the tricks, clothing, food, and the warmth of the community could not always save people from abnormal cold. Medieval history knows periods when winters were particularly harsh and long. These years remained in the memory of generations as times of great disaster. When the frost became extreme, the usual methods of protection ceased to work. The walls of houses froze, ice bound the rivers, and fuel supplies were running low. It was time for desperate measures. During such periods, people tried to spend all their time in the warmest corner of the house. Often, the whole family would move to live in the barn with the animals. The heat emanating from cows or sheep could be the deciding factor between life and death. Fuel conservation was taken to the extreme. The fire in the hearth was kept to a minimum, just enough to keep the coals from going out. Food was cooked once a day to make the most efficient use of the heat. All the cracks in the house were plugged with whatever was available: moss, rags, old clothes. Doors and windows were covered with additional layers of skins or fabric. The house was transformed into an airtight den, where the main thing was to preserve at least some heat. The diet became even more meager. People had to eat anything that could provide at least some calories. Tree bark and leather utensils were boiled down to make a kind of broth. Social ties were severely tested. In conditions of total resource scarcity, selfishness, and the instinct for self-preservation took over. Community laws of mutual aid ceased to function. Lonely, elderly people and widows with small children were particularly vulnerable. If they did not have strong relatives who could support them, their chances of survival were minimal. Winter mercilessly weeded out the weakest. Even in castles, life came to a standstill. Lords and their families locked themselves in the warmest rooms, reducing their activity to a minimum. Roads became impassable, and the castle was completely isolated from the outside world. These harsh winters were a ruthless filter of natural selection. They taught people to plan, stockpile supplies, and rely on each other. Every winter survived was a great victory, paid for with hard work, deprivation, and ingenuity.
Cold morning indeed.
We can see that surviving winter in the Middle Ages was a real art. It required a deep knowledge of materials, nature, and the human body. Every element of daily life, from the construction of houses to the cut of clothing, was part of a unified, well-thought-out strategy for combating the cold. Medieval man lived in harmony with the harsh rhythms of nature, which he could not control. He did not try to defeat winter, but learned to coexist with it, adapting and finding ingenious solutions in the simplest things. This daily unnoticed struggle for warmth is the true unsung heroism of that era. What other aspects of medieval life would you like to explore in future issues? Perhaps you are interested in medicine, construction, or travel? Suggest your topics in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new dives into history.